Welcome to Construction Revolution.
The revolution in the construction industry isn't just coming, it's already started.
This is Construction Revolution.
Construction Revolution.
This is the
This
revolution.
is the revolution.
Construction
Revolution.
Revolution.
Hi, I'm Matthew Newberger, and this is the Construction Revolution podcast. And I'm here today with Neil Agrawal and Heather Stegner, who are going to help tell us what's happening in the industry. So if you're a general contractor, a sub, a supplier, or anyone that uses wood for anything, you're going to learn a lot today about how it's sourced, how it's used, how it gets to you, some of the challenges in the industry, and maybe some things that are going to be changing. So Neil, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And Heather, thanks for joining us as well.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
So Neil, you and I work together. You're a client of Newberger's. I should probably disclose that. And so everybody understands, a little bit about Neil, what you do. And I want you to give a little bit of background on that. But I'd really like to start with where the wood actually starts. And Heather, so if you could give us a little quick background on you and what you do, and let's let our audience get just a better understanding of the role you play in the lumber industry.
Sure. So I'm the Vice President of Communications and Educational Outreach for the American Wood Council. AWC is the trade association for wood products manufacturers. So what we do really starts, or at least what our members do, really starts with the logs coming to the mill. What AWC does for our members, the variety of things, but we have a large staff of engineers who work on building codes and standards, regulations, environmental regulations, public policies as well, just to make sure that wood products are being used properly in designs, and also we'll do some testing to make sure that what's possible with wood is also reflected in the codes and standards and regulations.
Thank you. And so who's, just very quickly, who's a member of the organization?
Sure. So wide variety of big companies like Weyerhaeuser that are probably people are familiar with the names, to some smaller family-owned businesses.
An example of a family-owned business. What would that family-owned business be doing?
So an example of that, our current chairman is a representative of one of those businesses, Charles Ingram Lumber in the South.
Okay, so they're a lumber provider, supplier.
Yep, a sawmill.
The whole thing. Okay, great. That's super helpful. Neil, tell us a little bit about you, and that might transition very nicely from what Heather was just talking about. So give us your background.
Sure, absolutely. I'm Neil Agrawal. I'm Executive Vice President of GE Frisco. GE Frisco is a lumber supplier to general contractors and subcontractors focused on commercial construction in the DC and Baltimore markets. So we've been around for a long time, 65 years. We work pretty much across most trades in construction. We deal with softwood products as well as hardwood products. So softwood, it's probably what most people are familiar with. That's your standard framing lumber, your plywoods, your pressure treated, fire treated, those types of products. And then hardwood, we get into the low grade side of things. So that's mostly used for utility work, supportive excavation projects, so all the lumber that's sitting outside of an excavation, as well as for heavy highway type construction. So that's sort of who we are and the types of products that we offer.
Very cool. So I've got to ask, just on a personal note, how both of you got into the work you're doing currently. So Neil, I'm going to throw it back to you. How did you get into?
So
can we tell everybody you're from California? You went to Stanford, didn't you?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I didn't go. I guess if people watch this, these are not all my degrees.
I see a Harvard, Stanford.
No, that one day, maybe there'll be those added. But no, I went to Georgetown for undergrad and it focused on finance and accounting. So I'm lucky, I grew up around GE Frisco. GE Frisco is my family business. My dad and parents bought the company in 1985. So 65-year-old company, about 35 years in our family. So I would go tag along on weekends, see everything that was being done. But candidly, I didn't work that much in it growing up. And I made the decision after college to go pursue my own dreams and work and get my own experience. So I did investment banking for 3 years, worked at an internal hedge fund at Citigroup. I then moved west to work at the strategy group of Live Nation and helped with their merger with Ticketmaster. Got my MBA out at UCLA, and then started a couple different businesses in different areas, health tech, CPG. Ultimately, in 2014, my wife and I made the decision to move back to the DC area to be close to our parents, start our family. And I saw it as a great opportunity to join the family business, help my dad out. He was getting to an age of retirement, and wanted to see, what I could do with it. And so, it went from a place of, quite honestly, didn't really work in it, and now I couldn't be happier. It's such a great industry, just being part of construction, real estate development, and just paying one small piece in the whole puzzle of construction.
Well, what's really interesting, and you hear this in the construction industry a lot, Neil, I'm sure you've heard this, and Heather, I'm sure you've heard this too, is that nobody wants to get into construction. People want tech jobs. People want the Silicon Valley job. They want the hedge fund job, right? Because those grab the spotlight. Neil, you went the opposite direction. You went there first and then said, you know what? Construction, lumber.
Yep. I mean, it was, I survived. I was in finance from 06 to 09. So that was the prior, financial crisis, survived many rounds of layoffs. And that was kind of, the nail in the coffin. I was like, I'm going to leave that. And so that's why I switched gears a bit and focused more on the operational and entrepreneurial side of things. But it's funny, sometimes people are like, oh, construction people, oh, they're not that friendly. And I'm like, well, you haven't worked in finance, because that's a lot worse. So I'm like, oh, that guy, I love that guy. What are you talking about?
Right. See, in finance, they can actually be nice to, and you think they're being nice. In construction, you know exactly where you stand.
Oh yeah. There's no secrets, which is that, I'd rather that than the say one thing and then turn around and hear something else. I'm like, yeah, it's all crystal clear.
Well, it's interesting because I think that as we talk about the revolution that's happening in the construction industry, I think that you're going to start to see people that want to change it that have very diverse backgrounds. And I think that your background bringing into the construction industry has really massive potential implications to how things could be set up in the future. So I think it's interesting. But to somebody out there who's looking at it and saying, construction's not for me, your background, you might be somebody for them to talk to. You can warn them off.
It's a great industry, and I think you've probably seen it where the perception of working in construction is so different than the reality of working in construction. And I think people perceive that it's not going to be this fun, glamorous industry, but actual job satisfaction is off the charts, relative to a lot of industries. And I think we'll start to see that story take shape and become more and more and come more and more into the limelight and spotlight, and hopefully this industry will do a great job recruiting. Yeah.
And it's something we need. So I think it's a good point. And you could be somebody that could be an influence for a lot of people out there. Heather, tell us, how did you end up in your position?
Yeah, so I'm from Idaho. I grew up in a mill town. My dad has worked either in a paper or a wood mill my entire life. I actually worked in a sawmill also as a summer hire when I was going to college. So my degree's in communications, similar in that, so obviously I was very surrounded by the industry for my entire life. I did not necessarily plan on going into the industry. But so AWC is based in DC, Virginia area. I was living in DC. I saw this opportunity come up and thought, that seems like a really good fit, actually. So I think I came to it pretty naturally.
And remind me again, how long have you been in your position?
So I've worked for AWC for 7 years.
7 years.
Yep.
Okay. So at this point, you're stuck. This is 7 years, which is when you got to make the decision. This or something else.
mean, I'm in it. I think the industry, I mean, like Neil said, it's just a really great group of people. I think that was one of the draws when I'd never really lived anywhere outside of Idaho before I moved to DC. So that, you can imagine, is quite the difference.
A lot of people tell me there's a lot of similarities between DC and Idaho.
Oh yeah, all the time. You hear it all the time, right? Yeah. So I think I was looking for, you know, those salt of the earth people, and that's absolutely this industry. I love those, working with those people side by side. I think we have a pretty great story to tell on a lot of fronts. Some really exciting things going on in the industry, and we'll probably get to those. But yeah, so I'm in it at this point.
And you really love it because of the people that are in it is kind of what I'm taking.
Absolutely.
And that's, it's something that Neil said too. Tell me a little bit, maybe just about let's kind of get into what's happening and what's affecting both of you. And there's so many questions that, when I'm talking to a general contractor, I'm talking to an owner who maybe wants to build, something. And the last couple of months have been pretty frustrating, probably for you as well, for each of you. But anyone that wanted to build something, one of the problems was they couldn't get a price. Supply was kind of a mess, right? And so I'm interested to hear from both of you, but maybe if Heather, you could talk a little bit about where we are now. What's the last couple of months been like? Where are we now? And what do you think from a lumber supply standpoint we should be expecting in the future? Could you kind of give me a quick summary on that?
Sure. Well, so I think it's really important to note that not even just the last couple of months, the last year and a half, obviously people are very familiar with the synopsis, the uncertainty that happened. But I think it's really, really important to underscore that a lot of this for the wood products industry goes back to 2008. I mean, Neil already kind of referenced that in a very different aspect. But so the wood products industry in 2008, very tied to the housing market. There's a housing market crash. We lost 130 mills across the country, and those haven't come back. So, we're talking about the last couple of months, but for the wood products industry, this has been the last 12 years of a recession, whereas the economy rebounded, other industries rebounded, we haven't. And that's really affected how the industry looked at hiring, how they looked at capacity, how they looked at production. I think, so it's also important to note with this, I hate to use this word, but because it's so overused in the last year, but this unprecedented demand that we've seen, the industry has been trying to rise to the occasion. They've been producing at the highest levels since the Great Recession. But again, we don't have that mill infrastructure because we lost so many mills to add even more capacity because demand's been way more than we've seen in the past.
So did demand just all of a sudden sort of burst? I mean, it was sort of, we started to do better after the Great Recession, but demand grew, but it seemed like capacity would be met by the infrastructure as it was, but now.
I think honestly, it's been a confluence of issues that have just come to a head because of the pandemic. So the Wall Street Journal recently reported that we are 4 million homes below demand right now. So that's 4 million today because we've just been underbuilt. And then because of the pandemic, people were stuck at home and looked around and thought, I might be here for a while, so I might need to add an office space, or I've been wanting to build a deck and now I'm here, so maybe I'll do that. I saw a stat that 70% of homeowners over the last year and a half took on some kind of DIY project. So, that could range from small to large, but there was demand from remodeling. People who may have been saving and not really in the market to buy a home suddenly thought, it'd be really nice to have my own space and I don't have to pass people in the halls. So there was excess of people looking for homes. There was just layer after layer of added demand, and we were trying to catch up, I think. And I should also, back to your original question, so we've been producing the last year, we've also been adding capacity. There's been 4 billion board feet added to capacity in the last year. Most of that was in the US South. We're seeing more and more announcements of expansion projects coming online, or even brand new sawmills. There was a new sawmill announced project. Of course, it's going to take a while for that to come online, but that new sawmill was announced last week. We've seen announcements for new OSB mills as well. So the industry is coming, but it's also important to understand that those are lengthy processes, right? So in a normal time, yeah.
And Neil, you chime in here because I'm interested in what you're hearing and what you're seeing in terms of what's happening just on the kind of historically. And I asked for like what's happened in the last couple of years. Heather jumped in and said, hey, 2008 to now, this wasn't 2 years ago. So
well, yeah, I mean, to piggyback off Heather, she's exactly right. You know, people forget that lumber it's a commodity, and it's really just it's subject to supply and demand. That's what drives prices. That's what drives availability. And of course, it can be out of equilibrium, which is what we've seen over the last, you know, especially the last year and a half during the pandemic, where demand far outpaced supply. And, you know, Heather talked about, yes, there were a lot of factors on the demand side that, you know, just really compounded on top of one another. But there were also reasons on the supply side that kind of compounded on one another. You know, I mean, you had wildfires, you had the issues of the storms in Texas that shut down a resin mill that, you know, that resin is used in some engineered wood products. You know, at the beginning of COVID, I think some of the mills may have, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but I think some of them did shut down, at least initially thinking, hey, we're going to see a drop in demand. We don't want to overproduce. But obviously, you know, unbeknownst to everybody, that the reality of demand was so different than what anyone thought. I mean, for sure what we thought. I mean, we were all just scared of like, hey, what's going to happen with construction? Are we going to be shut down? You know, who knows? And so the other piece that people sometimes forget is supply chains take a long time to correct themselves. I mean, it's not like we can just turn on a switch and, all right, we got more lumber. And, you know, that's everything. When you go from harvesting the trees all the way to getting it to the end user, it takes a long time. And then also the information flow. You know, I mean, you know, there's something in the concept of operations called the bullwhip effect, right? Which is just the fact that demand forecasting, as you go through every layer, becomes worse and worse and worse. And then that like the, you know, the way that information is provided to the next piece of the chain, it gets exponentially worse and worse. So you start to see a lot of different you know, just factors come into play. The last, especially year and a half, demand has just continued to be strong, and supply has, even if production has increased, demand has outpaced that, you know, those production increases and the total production. And there have been certain factors that have continued to also hinder some elements of production, as I understand it. So, you know, we've just been at this point where there hasn't really been this great opportunity for supply to catch up. Yes, as of most recently, you know, we are seeing some significant price decreases in the last few weeks. So arguably, you know, that we are getting a bit back to some level equilibrium, but we're still far above historical averages. So
in terms of the mismatch between supply and demand.
Correct. Yeah. So basically, you know, for a little while, I guess the demand, at least for a short-term period of time, did taper off a bit. You know, as I understand it, some of the dealers like ourselves we haven't, you know, Matt, you and I have talked about this. We've decreased our overall buying, you know, just because I don't want to get stuck with material that's basically 2.5 times the price, because our general belief is that when things do come down, they will come down fairly quickly. And that's actually exactly what we've seen in the last few weeks, is that, you know, prices have decreased by 40 to 50%. And so we are, you know, we're cautious about buying. It's not that I'm buying just, you know, 3-4 truckloads of things that I know will move. I'm hesitant. I want to buy 1 or 2 and kind of just, you know, see what's going to happen a week, 2 weeks later. And we've reduced the total amount of inventory that we hold on hand at any given time now.
So interesting. So essentially, because the price is high and we're playing a game of hot potato, like who's going to be holding the hot potato at the end of this? It's another reason why supply is restricted. No one's willing to take any chances. You'd also told me offline that there's a trucking industry problem, which is in some cases the lumber is available, the transportation of the lumber is not.
Correct. Yeah. So add to our woes, I mean, it's trucking is a problem in every industry right now. People just aren't going into that job and career like they used to. So if you look at the average age of truck drivers, it's up there. I think I just read somewhere, or some, companies, their average age is like 50s. And so it's hard. It's becoming an industry that's becoming harder to attract new talent into. And so we are seeing an aging out of truck drivers, and we are seeing reduced supply of trucks out there. So that's causing its own massive, effects as to why availability isn't there. So some of our suppliers are like, hey, we got we have the material for you. I just have, I have 30 orders ahead of you. So you're
Right.
just,
And if you
number
want to
30.
get ahead of that order, you can always pay more, which means the price, it could be another factor that drives prices up, which is, in order to get truck drivers, we're not at a place yet where we have autonomous trucks covering the freeways. So if you
Right.
really want something, you'll just have to pay more for it. Right.
Yeah, and that only goes so far, truthfully. I mean, I think in a perfect world, we think that we can just pay to get something right away and expedite. I mean, those levers can be pulled, I think, to a certain extent, but the reality is some of our suppliers, they serve a lot of big customers. So, they might do a special favor here and there, but it's not like you can just, it's also not sustainable for us to keep overpaying for the freight piece of it and shipping piece of it.
Yeah,
just
but
to
I'm thinking
have it
longer term,
done.
if you want to attract laborers into the market
Mhm.
to drive the trucks,
Yeah.
there's gonna have to be some incentive.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've seen that firsthand with our own
Painting
in-house
flames on the
drivers.
side of your truck isn't going to be enough.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and like I said, so we've seen that with our own truck drivers. I mean, our wages for truck drivers, we're constantly looking for new ones. I mean, it keeps creeping up and creeping up significantly.
Yeah.
We see that too on the log side of things. There aren't enough drivers to get the logs to the mill.
Mm-hmm.
And that's got to be you've got to be, I would imagine, even a more skilled driver for something like that, because you're carrying a load that's constantly adjusting. It's not like something you put in a container and lock it up and go. It's, 10, 20, 30 tons of, logs moving around as you're driving down the road. So that's a little bit of what's happened. In the next couple of minutes, I'd like to hear from both of you on sort of what you see happening in the near term. If I'm an owner and I want to build something, if I'm a general contractor and I need to be able to competitively price my services to the built environment, how do I deal with this? What's the best thing I can do? What do you guys think?
There's a couple things, I mean, I think there's a couple of realities that have come to light as a result of the pandemic and just in general. One is that the importance of supplier diversity. I think that, and what I mean by that is not sole sourcing, and I think that has come fully to the forefront, for a lot of people, because something like lumber, which historically speaking was never really a bottleneck of construction, had rapidly become a bottleneck in construction. I mean, along with appliances, along with, a lot of other building materials. So I think what people often took for granted as like, oh, this will just be available whenever I need it, that's just not the case anymore, and so this has been an opportunity for us, but also something that we are honest with our customers about. If you really want that, several thousand pieces of wood, several thousand pieces of plywood, at least a few months ago, there was no way that we were going to be the only ones that could get you that. You're going to have to break that order up because no one was really sitting on any one piece of it. So I think that the importance of having supplier diversity has been just all the more emphasized. Unless you can really trust that if you are sole sourcing, either it's because you have to and there's no one else that makes it, the product, or you really have a great relationship with them such that you can get ahead of any problems that will come by. The other piece is volatility. I mean, I wholeheartedly believe in, I think the data is there. Volatility, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people on the dealer side believe it's here to stay. I think we're going to see, a lot faster price increases and decreases in the coming years. And you see this across so many different asset classes. This is not just lumber. You're seeing this in, Bitcoin, you're seeing this in stocks, you're seeing this in home prices. If something goes up 10, 20% in a month or two, I mean, that's a fast rise for an otherwise fairly stable asset, right? So So you're seeing it in a lot of different places, and there's a lot of other factors there. Obviously, I don't know if we want to get into the economic side of things, but there's a lot of factors there. So when it comes to working with owners, developers, contractors, I think everyone has to do their part and understand what the reality of the situation is. I mean, there's so many times, even today, the subcontractor, like our customer might be a subcontractor, and they'll be like, oh, the general contractor doesn't know what's going on. I'm like, how do they not know what's going on with lumber? And I don't think it's that they don't know. I think they're just trying to put that risk and that, on someone else. And I think we're going to get to a point where we have to all come to the table as a group between developers, owners, general contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, and increase that communication, increase everyone talking about how do we share in this risk of availability and pricing together. One person, in my opinion, shouldn't eat it all. And I think the best contractors, the best developers will be at the table talking to everyone and understanding that there is some shared risk. It doesn't mean everyone has to take in it equally, but it shouldn't be all pinned on one person.
Well, it's almost back to, so first of all, I really agree with that premise. I mean, I think you know that because we work together, but it's when you create a budget for a project in a vacuum where you don't understand how everything works, that problem, should somebody choose, a general contractor choose to accept that project at a price that you predetermined without understanding everything that's going on, it does create that domino effect of creating problems down the line. And it could mean that the project you thought as an owner you were going to get, you're not going to get.
Mm-hmm.
There's an old saying in the construction industry, there's never enough money to do it right the first time, but there's always money to do it over, right? And so it comes back to the owner maybe not necessarily understanding what's happening at that subcontractor level. To your
Right. And
so bringing
to be fair, I don't know that.
together.
I was gonna say, to be fair, I don't know that they want to get involved in every layer either. I mean, that's not where their developers are fairly lean, right? In the sense that they don't have that many people.
Like, that's what I'm paying you for.
Yeah, exactly. They're gonna. So, and
that's
the
price of wood today. I thought I hired you to do that. So
exactly. But outside of wood framing. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna one final comment. I apologize, Heather. But one final thing. I think that for so long, unless it was a wood framing project where wood was obviously a heavy piece of, big piece of the total budget, wood has always just been a plugged number. It's not that people would come to us to get pricing for their own bids. It's always just been a plug number. And obviously those plug numbers could not have been further from the reality in the last, year or so.
Yeah. And we're seeing that in other industries as well, not just wood, right? So anything that could be supplied, those numbers are now different. The cost is now different. The transportation is now different. It's not unique just to the wood industry, but it certainly is very relevant to you. So Heather, as you're hearing all of this, what do you think from your perspective, from AWF's perspective, what do you see as coming down the road?
Yeah, so AWC, I think, is very focused on more of a long-term solution. Our president and CEO has been on multiple conversations with the White House Supply Chain Disruption Task Force talking about these issues. You guys already mentioned transportation. That's definitely something that's on our mind. There are several bills introduced in Congress right now that would help get younger drivers in trucks, that would help incentivize women getting in the industry to try and build out that workforce, but also just general workforce training too for the mills. We're hearing from our members that they're having a hard time filling those jobs also. And some of those, I mean, the industry is a lot more high tech than people may think of. So there are jobs that, if you're doing a tour, it looks like guys are more playing video games than they are what you might imagine in a wood products mill, or very specialized positions. We need electricians. One that I hear about often, that who would ever hear about this, is a saw filer. In a sawmill, you need those saws to be very sharp, and there's a very specific job that keeps those saws sharp. And there's no real training in the US that I'm aware of to help get people ready for those positions. So investing in vocational training, investing in, high school programs to get people aware of these types of opportunities. Those are the types of things that we're focused on. And I think that would also cut across industries too, because as we've said, just echoing everyone, the construction industry is seeing this, the transportation industry is seeing this, we're seeing this. It's all over. And if we can address some of those issues, I think that would help everyone.
And some of those things really are going to take innovative people to take on those tasks and responsibilities, like education, like vocational schools. Mm-hmm. And do you see interest in the commercial space for people to do that?
I think that there's becoming interest. I don't know that there was before all of this, but if anything, the last couple months, the last year has shown a very bright spotlight on the need for it.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that, people that might listen to this or hear this that are thinking, what would be a cool idea to do? Mm-hmm. There are lots of ways to there's lots of ways to innovatively attack that. But, there's another problem in the country, which is there's lots of people that can't find work or under skilled labor. And they don't necessarily know that there's this whole industry where there's lots of need for drivers. There's lots of need for people to work in mills, et cetera, et cetera. So I think maybe a good place for us to kind of talk today is to have, or to wrap up today, is to have each of you maybe talk about maybe a central theme you think is important for people to take away from what's happening in the industry right now, and maybe a commitment. The name of the show is the Construction Revolution. And the idea is really, we all need to play a part in evolving and changing the things that don't work to make the built environment a better place, not just a better place to create more successful projects, to employ more people, to become more efficient in how we do things, and for people to understand where the opportunities are. And we all have to play a part in that. So I'd love to hear from each of you. And the second part of that question is what commitment is your organization making to change the built environment? So Heather, I'll start with you. What's one central takeaway? And then what's one commitment your organization is making or can make to improve the built environment?
Well, I think, we've talked about a lot of challenges, but there are a lot of opportunities in the industry too. And I touched on that at the very beginning. And I think let's end on that. Let's end on that high note. There's a lot of attention being paid right now to the need to reduce carbon in the built environment. And wood is the natural solution for that. Trees are sequestering the carbon. You put that tree into a wood product, into a home, then that wood product is storing that carbon for the life of the product. So there's a lot of opportunity to make sure that wood is recognized in these initiatives. And I think that's one of our primary efforts in the next 3 to 5 years. And the last 3 to 5 years. So AWC I've already mentioned that we are very active in codes and standards. We were very integral in getting tall mast timber recognized in the building code. So those are in there right now. As long as a state or locality adopts the 2021 International Building Code, you should be able to build up to 18 stories out of mast timber, which is a newer product to the US. I don't think you can see it, but I did have a block of CLT in the background at one point. And that, again, allows us to go taller with wood, which is a better environmental impact for the built environment. And that's, I think, where we're really focused once we can get all of these kinks worked out, and we're working on that too, but there's a lot of opportunity.
That's exciting. So it's really to make sure that the people understand that there's even more versatility and more benefit to building with wood than maybe other materials.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if somebody wanted to find out more about that, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So our website is awc.org. We have plenty of information about tall mast timber, the fire testing that's gone on to prove that mast timber can meet the current safety standards. I think that's a really important thing for people to know, is that we proved that we could meet the standard and not the other way around. The standard did not need to get affected in order for these types of construction to be incorporated. So awc.org, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, and we're posting about those things all the time.
Great. And if an architect or somebody wanted to contact you to find out what some of the benefits, the way they're thinking about designing a project or something like that, they could just reach out to you that way.
Yep, we have a help desk. We have a robust frequently asked questions section. I should also note that we offer free monthly webinars to go over how wood can be used from the codes and standards perspective. We go over some of these testings. We had a whole series on tall mass timber if people are specifically interested in that, and green building.
Who normally attends those?
Code officials, engineers, designers, that's our primary audience. Fire service officials also.
Love it. Okay, great. Super helpful. Thank you. Neil, same questions to you.
Sure. I mean, we are trying to really make a lumberyard, working at a lumberyard, cool and fun. I mean, we've really tried to focus both from a real perspective as to what we do in office and how we manage our team and how we approach our, employees. But also, from a social media standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, we're trying to bring more of a fresh perspective, kind of hopefully being best in class, at least locally, in terms of what we're doing, so that we can hopefully attract the right people, attract the newer, younger generation into our space. Because I go back to, I go back to exactly what Heather was saying, is that there is a lot of opportunity. I mean, construction is not going anywhere. Building with wood is definitely not going anywhere. It takes forever to change any of these codes. And we're paying attention to the whole mass timber and tall mass timber movement as well. In fact, I wrote an article for Washington Building Congress about mass timber, because I think a market like Washington, D.C., where there are height restrictions, is just perfect for it. And we've started to see a handful of buildings being constructed in our market, actually. So there's about like 3 or 4 buildings now. And I think it's hopefully only going to grow, it's ever since it was approved in the 2021 building codes. I'm hoping that there's some part that we as GE Frisco can play in that. Right now, a lot of it is manufacturer direct to contractor. So there is that piece where we're sort of not in the picture just yet. But I think that that's going to come. So, I think that'll be exciting. I mean, when you see the way some of these buildings look and are constructed, the design is just unbelievable. It's really best in class design. It looks cool. It's but especially a lot of them that have, like curtain wall, like glass curtain walls and all that. I mean, it just looks awesome. And so I'm excited about what's to come in that space. And I think that, again, best in class developers, they're all thinking about it. There's going to be some front runners in our market around wood specifically, that will make it fun and cool and hip, and I think that's going to drive it. But beyond that, it's attracting newer talent, younger talent, getting the younger generation into it, because there is a natural aging out that's happening in our space. It's the way the world works, right? Like tech is the cool thing right now, but there's so much that we have to offer, and I'm excited for what people will see in our space.
And I think there's something, there's something cool about knowing you had a hand in building something you can see, right?
Absolutely.
Totally.
And I think that, if you're just, the media out there is all about how do you get rich quick and do this and that. And I think there's a lot of people that really love the built environment. And if they listen to what they really want, what they want to do, to your point, you guys are really creating the future and trying to make, not just trying, but in the process of making it cool and fun and interesting and dynamic in terms of what you can build with wood. And I mean, we could do a whole nother show on what you can build and how much less space it takes if you use wood products and things like that than, and in DC, which is another problem, you can't just cordon off a couple of blocks. But there's so much to do. And I think one of the things I'm taking away, Neil, that you've said, but certainly it seems like it's consistent with what Heather's saying, is we need to create jobs. And I know that's something that, Neil, you and I have talked about in previous conversations. Where do we reach out to the community and let them know these jobs exist? Because it's not a high profile job. You can't compete with, a large advertiser for jobs the same way. While there are channels, what I'm hearing is part of the revolution for both of you is creating opportunity through legislation and through actual work, jobs, where people can do what they love, have fun, and do things that are lasting and amazing, and maybe even architecturally speaking, cutting edge. And that's exciting. So Neil, how would people get in touch with you if they were looking for a job or they wanted to see some of the cool design stuff that you've been involved with?
Yeah, I'm always up to connect with anyone, so people can email me, Neil, Neil @gefrisco.com. So Neil @gefrisco.com. I'm always available, happy to connect with people. I mean, I mentor kids at Georgetown, actually, in terms of career advice, all that stuff. You don't have to be a college grad by any means, to get into our space. So anyone, I'm always happy to chat with. You can also follow our company. Our handles are for Facebook and LinkedIn, it's @GE Frisco, and then Instagram, it's GE_Frisco. So check out what we're doing. I'm proud of the company that we have and have built and continuing to build upon. And I hope, again, that we just continue to play a bigger and bigger piece of the world that's changing around us rapidly, especially as it relates to construction.
Yeah, and if you want better partners, AWC and GE Frisco, in terms of understanding this part of the construction industry, you probably can't do any better. So thank you both for providing ways for people to get in touch with you. Thank you for giving us a little bit of perspective on what's happening in the industry, as well as what your commitments to make the industry better, and just generally where you think things are going. And I hope people will take advantage of the opportunity to reach out to you directly and learn more. But most importantly, to both of you, thank you for being part of the revolution. Thanks for spending your time with us today, and to our continued success in making the built environment a better place for everybody. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.